Well, hey, howdy, hi. Welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for stopping by and joining me today. I really do appreciate it. My name is Ellie, and I'm a witch. This over here is my teaching assistant, Andy, and today is Monday, and on my channel that means it is Misheard History, and today's topic is the Spanish flu. If you aren't interested in history, however, I do have two other series on my channel. On Sundays, I do Cryptid Countdown, where I take a state, city, region, or country, and I tell you about the cryptids that reside in those places. And then on Tuesday, I have Tea Time and True Crime, where I sip some tea and tell you a true crime case. If you ever wonder on what authority I talk about any of these subjects with, I'm in college actively pursuing a degree in history as a topic, as well as criminology, and I just enjoy talking about cryptids. With all that being said, let's go ahead and jump into the video. So jumping into talking about the Spanish flu, I'm going to go ahead and give you the timeline of when it started, a little bit about what happened through it, and then when it ended. And at the very end of this video, I'll do some myths and then the truths behind them, and you can play along with that. March of 1918 is the first time that something was noticed to be amiss. In Kansas, on Fort Riley, 100 soldiers fell ill with flu-like symptoms, and within just a week, the number of cases quadrupled. The following month, in April, was the first time we see cases outside of the base being reported. 18 severe cases and 3 deaths were caused by that outbreak. September of the same year is the next time that we see the peak in cases, this time in Boston at a military base called Camp Devens. It also began to spread to other military bases as well as a naval base in the area. Due to the rapid increase in cases, the New York Board of Health actually changed the flu to be a reportable illness. This meant that hospitals were required to report any and all cases of flu that they saw, as well as it meant that if you had flu-like symptoms, you were to stay home and quarantine yourself. By the end of September, there was 14,000 cases reported at Camp Devens alone and 757 deaths within the month. Moving on to October, we're still seeing a rise in cases. In October alone, 195,000 Americans died by the flu. This time in history, we also see a severe nurse shortage due to the Great War. Almost all of the nurses were sent with the military, and the United States refused to use the African American nurses that were trained. The Red Cross sent out urgent notices begging any volunteers to help nurse the sick. Philadelphia got hit so hard there was over 500 bodies left unburied for over a week. Coal plant factories were offering to house bodies in a makeshift morgue type situation, and trolley car manufacturers were donating packing crates to be used as coffins. At the same time in San Francisco, the Board of Public Health issued a notice that everyone who was leaving their houses were required to wear a mask in order to curb the spread, and New York was struggling with shipping out supplies due to a 40% decline in workers at the shipyard due to the flu as well as being in the middle of World War I. In November of 1918, the First World War was finally over, and with it came a rise in cases. People celebrating the end of the war were not listening to safety protocols, they were not wearing masks, and they were interacting with tons of people. In Salt Lake City, city officials went to homes placing signs that indicated that the inhabitants were quarantining. They placed signs on over 2,000 homes, all of which had at least one inhabitant having reported having had symptoms of the flu. December was met with a surge of public health officials mandating new protocol in order to curb the spread of the flu, namely the increase in education of the spread of illnesses, teaching people the dangers of not covering your nose and mouth when coughing or sneezing, as well as not properly disposing of your nasal discharge. Factory owners were encouraged to stagger the opening and closing times, as well as stagger employee shifts, so not as many people were working together in close proximity, and workers were encouraged to walk to work rather than take public transportation, as not to spread the illness to a large crowd. The third massive wave of the flu began in January of 1919. Just 5 days into January, San Francisco had reported 1,800 cases and 101 deaths. San Antonio had an even larger surge, however, this is mainly attributed to the fact that hospitals had not been required to report cases up until that point. New York was struggling with 700 cases in January alone, however, that outbreak only resulted in 67 deaths. Meanwhile, some attempts to find a cure were underway in Boston. Boston City Hospital was asking the mayor for a $3,000 appropriation in order to study the flu. And as quickly as it started, it ended. February of 1919, it was seemingly eradicated and cases continued dropping to zero. It was at this time that Illinois passed a bill and created a 1-year course to become a practical nurse. This was meant to address the nurse shortage that was realized during the pandemic. The biggest reason the flu disappeared was simply that those who were sick died and the rest of the population gained an immunity. The flu was caused by the H1N1 virus. This strain specifically came from birds, and H1N1 is actually attributed to another pandemic that was in 2009. So throughout this, if you've noticed or not, I've been calling it the flu rather than the Spanish flu, and the reason for that is that the Spanish flu name is actually just a misnomer. So at the time that the Spanish flu presented itself, we were going to war. So the US was blocking news from countries we weren't allied with at the time, and Spain was neutral, which meant we were getting some of our information from them. This led to the idea that the flu originated in Spain, thus the Spanish flu. So that I've given you the facts of this topic, we're going to go ahead and go over some myths, and then I'll tell you the truth behind them. If you want to play along and just pause the video after I give you the myth, try to figure it out yourself, that'd be great. So the first myth is that if you contracted the flu, you were as good as dead, because everyone who got the flu died. The truth is that while contraction and transmission rates were exceptionally high, only about 20% of the people who got infected died, which is still a lot of people, but not nearly as much as people think. It also varied across state and by nationality. For instance, Native Americans had a higher mortality rate, which is likely due to not having been exposed to as many influenzas as those who had European heritage did. The next myth is that nothing was medically done for those who had the flu. The truth is, not much is different from today. Often confused as being bacterial, the flu is a virus and cannot be treated with antibiotics, meaning that even today, there's little more we can do than make those affected with the flu comfortable. Speaking to 1918, though, there is a lot of discourse surrounding how many of the deaths attributed to the flu were actually the flu. In 1918, there was no limit on what doctors thought was a safe dose for most medications. This meant there was no dose maximum when it came to aspirin. This has led many to believe that a good portion of cases attributed to the flu were actually attributed to aspirin poisoning. The next myth is that the pandemic was virtually the only thing that the newspapers covered at the time. The truth is that for the most part, officials, police, and healthcare alike were trying to keep the news on the down low. This was not only to ensure that the public didn't panic, but also to not let enemy countries know that we were vulnerable at the time. Given that the World War was in full swing, trying to protect people from an attack on home soil was of the utmost importance. But of course, there was news out there. As it was a public health crisis, public officials had to respond accordingly. The last myth that we will go over is the myth that the flu influenced the outcome of World War I. The truth is, it's seemingly the opposite. The flu didn't really affect the fighting, given that it was affecting the Axis and the Allied powers equally. The war, however, created the perfect breeding ground for stronger strains and larger outbreaks. Since the military was in camps and on bases training, this allowed the flu to spread much more easily, infecting way more people than it might have. When a virus spreads, it begins to mutate. This means that it can infect those who already have an immunity to it. This leads to more dangerous strains, as well as how fast the transmission rate is. And that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for stopping by and joining me. I hope you learned a thing or two, and that you joined in with the little game at the end there. I think that's something that I definitely want to include more of. I think that was a lot of fun. If you did enjoy this video or you got something out of it, you can hit that like button. I'd really appreciate it. If you didn't like it and you think that there's something that I can improve, if you want to hit that dislike button and let me know in the comments, I'd really appreciate that as well. Like I said before, I do have two other series on my channel. I have a cryptid series as well as a true crime series. Yesterday I talked about Alaskan cryptids, and then tomorrow is a video about H.H. Holmes. So if you're interested in something like that, definitely hit that subscribe button because I have plenty of fun videos coming out. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really did appreciate taking up a little bit of your time. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you next time. Bye!